Good evening. You're watching Newsnight, your one-stop destination for all the news and analysis of the day's biggest news stories. Our top focus is going to be on the COP26 Glasgow summit, on the details of the outcome document that was adopted there by 197 nation states and the role that India played in ensuring that the interests of developing countries was not ignored in the climate negotiations. Well, all that and more in Newsnight tonight. First up, the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi transfers the first installment of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Grameen, a rural housing scheme, to more than 1.47 lakh beneficiaries of Tripura. Says the first installment has given a new impetus to the dreams of Tripura, draws a contrast between the past and present, says unnecessary rules are no longer allowed to become hindrances for the welfare of citizens. Centre to celebrate birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas on 15th November. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to launch multiple key initiatives for the welfare of the tribal community. PM to inaugurate the redeveloped Rani Kamlapati railway station in Bhopal and Bhagwan Birsa Munda Memorial Park and Museum at Ranchi via video conferencing. A delegation from Punjab, Delhi and J&K meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Requests for reopening of Kartarpur corridor closed on account of the COVID-19 pandemic on the occasion of the Sri Guru Nanak Dev's birth anniversary. Submits a memorandum to the PM. Huge success for the security forces against Naxals. 26 Naxals neutralized in police encounter in Gadchiroli district in Maharashtra. Top commander Milind Teltumbre also killed. Teltumbre carried a cash reward of 50 lakh rupees. Home Minister Amit Shah chairs the 29th meeting of the Southern Zonal Council at Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Says chief ministers should give priority to addressing the menace and spread of narcotics as drug usage destroy the lives and potential of our youth. Asked states to speed up second dose of COVID-19 vaccinations below the subdivision level. The India International Trade Fair begins in Delhi. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal inaugurates the fair. Says India is on its way to touching new heights in securing record exports. The theme for the fair this year is Self-Reliant India. COP26 summit concludes after 197 nation states agree on a deal after last-minute hiccups. India strongly pitches in to safeguard the interests of the developing world. Final document stresses on the need for the developed countries to contribute to the fight of developing countries against climate change. COP26 summit host Britain hails the deal struck at the end as a big step forward in the first ever international agreement to phase down use of coal. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the outcome document reflects the interests, contradictions and the state of political will in the world today. Says the deal was an important step but not enough. Underlines the need to go into emergency mode. And one of our top stories tonight, Prime Minister Narendra Modi transferred the first installment of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Grameen, a rural housing scheme, to more than 1.47 lakh beneficiaries of Tripura. And on the occasion, the Prime Minister said that the first installment has given a new impetus to the dreams of Tripura, drawing a contrast between the past and the present. PM said that while earlier beneficiaries were not able to get any benefits without giving bribes, now ease of living has increased and unnecessary rules which were hindrances for the welfare of citizens have been done away with.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi transferred the first installment of the Pradhan Mantri Grameen Awas Yojana to more than 1.47 lakh beneficiaries of Tripura. More than rupees 700 crore were credited directly to the bank accounts of the beneficiaries on the occasion. Addressing the gathering, the Prime Minister said today's event is an indication of the coming great days and hope for Tripura. The Prime Minister said that the region's huge potential will be unleashed by creating modern infrastructure and improving connectivity. He expressed confidence that work being done in the region will take the country to new heights of growth.
बीते 4 वर्षों में त्रिपुरा के गांवों में करीब 50,000 परिवारों को पीएम आवास योजना के तहत पक्के घर बनाकर दिए जा चुके हैं। अब करीब 1,60,000 नए घरों की स्वीकृति दी गई है।
Talking about the long prevailing neglect of the northeastern region, the Prime Minister said that earlier our rivers from the northern and western parts of the country used to come to the east, but the gauges of development used to stop before reaching here. Today, the development of the country is seen with the spirit of Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat.
पहले नीतियां दिल्ली के बंद कमरों में बनती थी और पूर्वोत्तर को उनमें फिट करने की नाकाम कोशिश होती थी। जमीन से ये कटाव ही अलगाव को जन्म देता है। इसलिए पिछले 7 सालों में देश ने एक नई सोच, नई अप्रोच तय की है। अब दिल्ली के हिसाब से ही नहीं, बल्कि यहां की जरूरतों के हिसाब से नीतियां बनती।
The Prime Minister said that whether it is the state government or the centre, rules are not allowed to become hindrances for the welfare of the citizens. The Prime Minister criticised the earlier system wherein beneficiaries were not able to get any benefits without giving bribes.
सीमित समय में नई व्यवस्थाएं खड़ी की जा सकती हैं। आज मैं त्रिपुरा को बधाई देता हूं कि त्रिपुरा ने करके दिखाया है। पहले यहां कमीशन और करप्शन के बिना बात ही नहीं होती थी, लेकिन आज सरकारी योजनाओं का लाभ डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर डीबीटी के जरिए सीधे आपके बैंक खातों में पहुंच रहा है।
Following the Prime Minister's intervention, taking into account unique geoclimatic conditions of Tripura, the definition of Kacha house has been changed specifically for the state, which has enabled such a large number of beneficiaries living in Kacha houses to get assistance to construct a Pakka house. Bureau Report, DD India.
At the COP26 summit in Glasgow, India not only raised its climate ambitions, but also played a key role in putting forth the stance of developing countries in negotiations. India negotiated hard to ensure that the legitimate needs of developing countries are reflected in the outcome document. Here's more. After 2 weeks of hard-nosed negotiations and marathon sessions, all 197 parties of the United Nations signed up on the Glasgow Climate Pact at COP26. India was the voice of millions of people from developing countries representing their cause in climate negotiations. India's advocacy played a key role in putting the spotlight on the legitimate requirements of developing countries for combating climate change in tune with their national circumstances. The key features of the Glasgow Climate Pact include asking countries to strengthen their 2030 climate action plans on nationally determined contributions by next year, establishing a work program to urgently scale up mitigation ambition and implementation, deciding to convene an annual meeting of ministers to raise ambition of 2030 climate actions, calling for an annual synthesis report on what countries were doing, requesting the UN Secretary General to convene a meeting of world leaders in 2023 to scale up ambition of climate action, asking countries to make efforts to reduce usage of coal as a source of fuel and abolish inefficient subsidies on fossil fuels while providing targeted support to the poorest in line with national circumstances, asking developed countries to deliver on their promise to urgently provide $100 billion in climate finance every year to developing countries, initiating discussions on setting new target for climate finance beyond $100 billion for the post-2025 period, asking developed countries to provide transparent information about money they plan to provide, and also asking developed countries to at least double money aimed at adaptation in developing countries by 2025 from 2019. India ensured that language in the final outcome document on coal power and fossil fuel subsidies was modified to reflect the needs of the developing world. The text was changed from the need for phasing out of unabated coal power subsidies to phasing them down and providing targeted support in terms of coal power and fossil fuel subsidies to the poorest and the most vulnerable in line with national circumstances.
Every country will arrive at net zero as per its own national circumstances, strengths and weaknesses. developing countries have a right to their fair share of the global carbon budget and are entitled to the responsible use of fossil fuels within this scope. In such a situation, how can anyone expect that developing countries can make promises about phasing out coal and fossil fuel subsidies? Developing countries have still to deal with their development agendas and poverty eradication.
Earlier this month, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered the national statement at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, presenting 5 nectar elements of Panch Amrit to deal with the challenge of climate change, raising some of India's existing climate targets and announcing some new ones.
क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस को लेकर आज तक किए गए वायदे खोखले ही साबित हुए हैं। जब हम सभी क्लाइमेट एक्शन पर अपने एम्बिशन बढ़ा रहे हैं, तब क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस पर विश्व के एम्बिशन वहीं नहीं रह सकते जो पेरिस एग्रीमेंट के समय थे।
With promises made by the developed nations till date regarding climate finance proving to be hollow, at the summit, India pushed for scaling up ambitions on climate finance from what was decided in the Paris Agreement reached in 2015. India said it expects developed countries to provide climate finance of $1 trillion at the earliest. At the summit, it also called for ratcheting up pressure on countries not living up to their promises on climate finance and underlined the need for tracking climate finance. In 2009, developed countries had promised to mobilize at least $100 billion every year from 2020. This promise was reaffirmed during the Paris Agreement, which also asked the developed countries to scale up this amount from 2025. The 2020 deadline has long passed, but the $100 billion promise has not been fulfilled. The developed nations have now said that they will arrange this amount by 2023. India's exemplary leadership at the COP26 summit ensured that the voices of developing countries were heard and the outcome document reflected their interests. Bureau Report, DD India. So after 2 weeks of negotiations, the international community finally agreed on the Glasgow Climate Pact, while British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who hosted the COP26 summit, hailed the deal struck at the end as a big step and the first ever international agreement to phase down the use of coal. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the outcome document reflects the interests, contradictions and the state of political will in the world today. He also said that the deal was an important step, but it was not enough, and underlined the need to go into emergency mode.
The outcome of COP26 is a compromise. It reflects the interests, the contradictions, and the state of political will in the world today. It is an important step, but it's not enough. We must accelerate climate action to keep alive the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. I want to send a message to young people, indigenous communities, women leaders, all those leading on climate action. I know you are disappointed, but the path of progress is not always a straight line. Sometimes there are detours, sometimes there are ditches, but I know we can get there. We are in the fight of our lives, and this fight must be won.
UN climate talks in Scotland ended on Saturday with a global agreement that aimed at least to keep alive hopes of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius and so maintain some chance of saving the world from catastrophic climate change. UN Secretary General said that the outcome document reflects the interest, the contradictions and the state of political will in the world today. The UN chief added that it is time to go into emergency mode. The conference chairman, Alok Sharma, was visibly emotional before banging down his gavel in relief to signal that there were no vetoes from the almost 200 national delegations present in Glasgow, ranging from coal and gas-fueled superpowers to oil producers and Pacific Islands being swallowed by the rise in sea levels. The 2-week conference in Glasgow, extended into an extra day of torturous negotiations, was the 26th of its kind, but the first to call for a reduction in fossil fuels, which not only power much of the world's economy but are also the main cause of man-made global warming. COP26 President Alok Sharma said that it had been an emotional evening after a new global climate deal was agreed at the Glasgow summit on Saturday.
It was two years of great teamwork by the UK team, and of course we had an opportunity to work with all the parties who were incredibly constructive throughout these 2 weeks. So I'm very pleased we've got this over the line.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson praised the achievements of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. In a pre-recorded speech released by 10 Downing Street, Johnson said that the great news is together the world has made some important breakthroughs.
we've kept alive the hope of restricting the growth in temperatures to 1.5 degrees. And we've made huge progress on coal, cars, cash and trees. For the first time ever, we've got over 190 countries all agreeing to sound the death knell for coal power.
But some nations, especially the developing ones, did not seem impressed. But wealthy countries failed to make good on an unmet $100 billion climate finance commitment to support developing countries from 2020, with the text calling only for the money to be delivered urgently. Bangladesh's climate envoy called the COP26 outcome an absolute failure.
It's a death sentence for the poorest people on the planet. And not only that, the polluters are saying, to hell with you, we don't care, we're not going to give you a penny.
Meanwhile, US climate envoy John Kerry said that the world was closer than ever to avoiding climate chaos following the COP26 conference in Glasgow.
Paris built the arena, and Glasgow starts the race. And tonight, the starting gun was fired. We have about 9 years within which to make those critical decisions we were warned about in 2018.
Kerry also said the conference raised ambition among the majority of the world's 20 biggest economies. Negotiators closed a deal setting rules for carbon markets at the United Nations COP26 climate talks on Saturday, potentially unlocking trillions of dollars for protecting forests, building renewable energy facilities and other projects to combat climate change. Bureau Report, DD India.
And that brings us to our In Focus tonight, which is Glasgow Climate Pact adopted and the takeaways and India's leadership role during the negotiations at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. To discuss that, we have with us Ambassador Manjeev Puri, he is former Indian ambassador and climate negotiator, and Aarti Khosla. She is Director, Climate Trends, and she joins us from Glasgow. I welcome you both to Newsnight. I'll begin with the guest from Glasgow itself. Ms. Khosla, you've seen the summit negotiations from very close quarters. The international community went into it, just like we've gone into various COPs in the past, with a lot of expectations. How much of those expectations have been realized? How would you characterize the outcomes?
Well, as you see, there were 2 weeks of intensive back and forth, and a lot of fault lines came, especially on matters of finance, which has been a long overdue discussion since the Copenhagen COP of 2009. But in the end, if you saw the mood in the room yesterday, and there were statements that were made which talked about discomfort, imperfection, compromise, but yet everybody did agree and the final gavel was slammed. So my read is that, of course, the world is quite a distance away from what climate action would need. The emissions would actually increase by 10 to 13%, as a lot of reports point out, as opposed to coming down by 40 to 50%. But if saving the multilateral process is a grace, then I think that's what the summit indeed delivered, with a lot of drama in the end.
Right. So, Ambassador Puri, drama in the end is what we saw, and she mentioned climate finance. What are your, what's your analysis really of what has transpired there in Glasgow?
Can you hear me, Manu?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes.
I said for someone who landed early in the morning in Delhi, this was not unexpected. These COPs have a kind of DNA of going on beyond time, for going on till 4 o'clock in the morning and then patting themselves on the back. That's the nature of the game. I mean, I think there has to be a very clear understanding. These are power games, this time couched in energy and climate change. However, this is an existentialist threat, and therefore the polluters must really come together. I completely agree with Aarti that thank God that the climate talks have at least re-begun in a sense. The last 4 years was all quiet, principally as a result of the world's largest polluter having pulled out of the Paris Agreement altogether. Thereafter, you had COVID, and then there was all this fear that will this come about at all. So I'm very glad that it has happened. The discussions have begun, and now things have to be taken forward. Let's be very clear on one thing. When the United States and Chinese shook hands over a deal among themselves, and a deal which was low on domestic ambition, saying whatever they may be for the world, you knew that this was a COP with limited likelihoods of ambition realization. That's exactly what happened. I sympathize with the UN Secretary General, who has put out his good name in trying to push for ambition, etc. But these are some of the realities of life, and these need to be understood. And I hope that things, as they progress, will achieve more and take things forward. Now, what really, in a sense, in my mind, disappoints is that the developed world has tried to buy itself time. That they did right at the beginning itself by not focusing on action in the next 9 years, as John Kerry mentioned, but in focusing on action in the next 30 years, when they spoke about net zero by 2050. So most people said, come on, you need to do action today, not 30 years from now. And they went on in that way. Thereafter came the issue of climate finance. What are we doing? In 2009, in Copenhagen, the $100 billion was promised. Not in Paris, nowhere around. 2009, and now it is 2021, and we are only reiterating it, and hopefully we'll find a mishmash to take it. Look, the developed world has to be serious about domestic action and in terms of action in terms of global solidarity, finance being the principal point. India, in fact, in my view, has gone way ahead, taken on commitments which many people would say have also possibilities of impacting our development trajectory. But we have gone ahead, demonstrated leadership, and made major global calls. So, this is the kind of thing that we are doing. And those who really have the abilities, well, they shake hands.
Absolutely. Well, Ms. Khosla, as far as climate finance is concerned in Prime Minister's national statement, we heard him say that the commitments are not being met, and it is important to track climate finance just as it is important to track climate mitigation. He also said that the countries that have made commitments or promises on delivering annually $100 billion to developing countries in climate finance need to be pulled up, and that pressure needs to be ratcheted up. And he said that at least $1 trillion is needed on immediate basis. While there are a whole sort of expectations which India has also voiced at the summit, on the other hand, there is this reality that it's only mentioned there in the outcome document that developed countries need to urgently provide the committed finance, and then negotiations are now beginning on the post-2025 scenario. So a mixed bag, or a lot of way to travel from here on, you would say?
Of course, first of all, in the question on finance, it's who will pay and to whom. And it's quite evident that even there is language which is slowly going towards the direction of asking for broadening the pool of which countries should be paying up for the rest of the world, and also which institutions should be part of it. There is the question of what is known as the $100 billion of climate finance, which anyway in 2020 was not delivered and now is promised to be delivered in 2023. I think the decision outcome also fell short of talking on anything on what will happen after 2025. So you're at a point where we are talking about long-term strategies on what countries will do on climate action in the long term, but we are not ready to discuss long-term finance. And it's it's counterintuitive in that way to discuss long-term strategies when there is no long-term finance. I think the positive is that money will not just come as loans or as grants alone, and there will be a lot of private sector movement of finance, the kind of which that you saw in the deals and the announcements that got made, and the money that got committed also in terms of private capital. And anyway, with how the renewable energy expansion has happened in India for the last couple of years, it's quite evident that despite the climate challenge which remains, there is also a market signal and how the investors are putting in money where the future course of action is, and that's quite in the direction of clean transport, clean energy, and towards low carbon systems. So in that way, there is the private sector which will live up, but to the extent that this process was meant to talk about the 100 billion, it has deeply acknowledged, actually, the decision text says that acknowledges with deep regret the inability to deliver the 100 billion, and there is a discussion as well to deliver 500 billion between 2021 and 2025, but that money has indeed always remained elusive, and the gap is only increasing. The other point that emerged at this meeting is the increased focus on loss and damage and the request of a lot of vulnerable nations to create what would be a loss and damage finance facility. And in the end, while there is again acknowledgement in the decision on how this is important, I think the framework and the governance structure of everything to do with a loss and damage finance facility needs to be worked out. It's quite evident that in COVID times, when countries don't have money to pull out from the pocket for their own expenditure, it's very, very hard to put in money for a climate impacted country. But if that is the reality that we are living in this world, and the kind of speeches that were made by HODs and lead negotiators yesterday, which gave the sense that it's a question of life and death, I think that must translate into where the money is coming from.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned that as far as loss and damage is concerned, the earlier text had mentioned that there should be a facility, but this one only talks about the need for a dialogue, and that wouldn't inspire so much confidence, considering that the previous text had gone further. But Ambassador Puri, how do you look at the way India led the developing world there at the summit, and the various points that had got included in the final text? There were certain modifications also, from phasing out to phasing down of coal power subsidies, for instance, and the point that India has been continuously making, that it would not like sectoral targets to be set, whereas it would want economy-wide targets like emission intensity cuts, etc., to be set for the world.
Munmun, thank you very much. Look, let me tackle the second part of your question first. India is a country where the development challenges are still so heavy and so tremendous that even though we are a member of the G20, we are truly a developing country. So when we spoke in terms of, the changes on the fossil fuels text, let's also acknowledge the fact that we need them. And we can't just put them out simply because Great Britain, which has been burning fossil fuels for the last 150 years and with gay abandon, can agree to do so at its state of play in which it is today. So we spoke up for development, we spoke up for the need for developing countries, and we actually put our mouth or our fingers where our wallet lies. We've really made the effort for the developing countries. I think much of what has got lost in this entire translation is the fact that India made a huge push for adaptation. And this was made by the Prime Minister himself in the first plenary, not the one which is being referred to much, but the first plenary which was chaired by Boris Johnson. Now, adaptation is an equal commitment to this entire business of mitigation, and yet is treated as something which is, yes, by the way, it's got to be done. Even at this summit, while there was an acknowledgement and an agreement to step up climate adaptation finance, the fact is that it took a country like India to, put its finger on that and push for adaptation, because whether you like it or not, the developing world in particular is going to have to undertake adaptation, even if today the entire world switches off on the use of carbon emitting fossil fuels, etc. These are the facts and realities of life. We also made a very strenuous effort in terms of technological help, innovation, technology, and finance for adaptation. And I think these things were particularly important. Now, talking about India, I want to mention two specific things. One, we broadened the International Solar Alliance, which we have grounded and founded and taken forward by coupling it along with Great Britain and their Green Grids initiative. We brought in the United States, huge player. This adds to the entire renewable effort worldwide. And secondly, we did something else which again received very little coverage, which was to do something for the small island states who are the greatest sufferers but have no contribution and will have no contribution to climate change, which is threatening the entire world. This was the thing called IRIS, the infrastructure which is resilient for island states. And we took the step forward and took that forward. So, we are doing more than our share, but the world really has to step up to it, and mostly the developed world, who not only have historical responsibility, but actually have the wherewithal to deliver and deliver now, but are looking the other way.
Ms. Khosla, on the issue of carbon markets, would you say that some incremental forward movement has been made considering that after the Kyoto Protocol, there was really no carbon market, and the developed countries had earlier said that the credits that developing countries say they have are suspect.
Yes, I mean, the issue is not just very technical. It's also one where how much you can establish a carbon market mechanism, which is not just good for trading and offsets in the end, but actually brings overall emission reduction. And it felt like that's where a lot of the conversation was hinging. I'm not an expert on carbon markets, but I will only say that from my limited understanding that I felt that the tricky issue of double counting, how do you ensure that projects are not counted by countries as carbon emission reduction as well as by the project proponents, that has been seized to a certain extent, and it feels that we have something in the hand where the final text is at least an attempt to circumvent the problem by essentially creating two kinds of parallel tracks, one for compliance markets and the other really for the voluntary markets. And India as well, in the intervention that was made was very clear in saying that we are going to look for absolute and real emission reductions and not just rely on cheap offsets. And there is the second issue of which India was supporting for a long time, which was the issue of carryover of credits from the Kyoto period into the new regime. And I understand that there is some kind of a bridging proposal which has also been accepted, keeping in mind the demands of essentially large countries like Indonesia, India, and a few others, to not just junk what was created by carbon markets before, but actually bring it forward into the new regime. And because Article 6 was such a contentious matter right from the end of the Paris Agreement, and it got rolled over even in 2019 when the COP in Madrid had happened, it was quite important for the UK presidency to be able to show that Article 6 has indeed been resolved. And my view is that, of course, less work was done in the 2 years when more could have been done, but somehow the loopholes were tried. There was an attempt to cover the loopholes in the last 72 hours, and we have something which we can work towards from here on.
Right. Ambassador Puri, I'll take the last question to you. How do you look at what other countries have done? For instance, in the emerging economies, we've seen Brazil has said that it would be advancing its net zero target here from 2060 to 2015. China has promised a detailed roadmap for its commitment to let emissions peak in 2030 and also for its 2060 net zero target. Israel has announced net zero target for 2050, and over 100 countries pledged to reduce methane emissions by at least 30% from the present levels by 2030. And methane emissions are far more polluting, I believe, than CO2 emissions.
Munmun, look, I think we should be quite clear that developing countries are quite cognizant of the threats of climate change. And even though they have huge development imperatives in front of them, they are taking a lot of action. Now, let's take the case of China. Certainly the world's largest global emitter now, but look what it's done to its economy. And so, therefore, it has come forward and is taking things, in my view, not sufficient enough, but at least it's willing to make the efforts and do things. India, of course, has been an exemplary leader, huge way to go on our development needs, but still willing to try and green as much as we can, and in fact take suo moto targets such as our developments of renewable energies, the targets that we are setting ourselves on electrification of the railways, what we are doing for solar energy in general, every single thing we've been doing. So has Brazil, so have Indonesia, so have some of the African countries, such as not just South Africa, but also Nigeria and many of them. So developing countries remain cognizant. Within the developed world, what you really see is the Europeans are always very smug about saying we are doing it, we are doing a hell of a lot. And yes, they are, because they have the capacities, they don't have fossil fuels available with themselves, they have an imperative to change. It's the United States which really must undertake domestic action. And I underline this many times. International action is good to talk about, but when you are the big domestic player, please take domestic action. Your domestic action will have such positive spillover effects in the world, whether it is in terms of innovation, whether it is in terms of money markets becoming available, or whether it is just in terms of global trend setting, because you are such a large influencer in the world. Please do that. That's what is required. I'm glad what Aarti just mentioned. She's really being very modest in saying she's not an expert. She really is an expert. If we unlock markets, then we need to take things forward. But there again, what was the problem? Kyoto started this market mechanism. We had this thing called the clean development mechanism. Now, what do you want? You want others to do the heavy lifting for you and you to take the credit. You know, it doesn't work like that. When you are looking at the real world in trying to do win-wins in which both sides get something out of the deal that we have to work something out. I hope Glasgow is what John Kerry said. The race has begun, and that is important. And I'm very happy to see India is very much not just at the start line, willing to take one of the first few steps ahead.
Absolutely. So we expect sooner action going forward, especially keeping in mind the historic responsibilities of the developed countries. Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri, as well as Aarti Khosla, for having joined us.
Thank you.
Let's move on now to some other news stories. Union Home Minister Amit Shah chaired the 29th meeting of the Southern Zonal Council at Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh on Sunday. 40 out of 51 pending issues were resolved in the context of the meeting of the Southern Zonal Council at Tirupati, chaired by him. Delivering his closing remarks at the meeting, Home Minister said that Chief Ministers should give priority to addressing the menace and spread of narcotics as drug usage destroy the lives and potential of our youth. The Home Minister said that states should create an independent institution of director prosecution to speed up prosecutions. Amit Shah also said that all states should establish at least one forensic science college with a syllabus in the local language so that they can have trained manpower which can meet the needs of forensic investigation. The Home Minister said that POCSO crimes should have zero tolerance and POCSO cases should be given priority. Crimes against children are unacceptable, he said, and time frame of 60 days should be adhered to. The Home Minister said that states should speed up second dose of COVID-19 vaccinations below the subdivision level. Chief Ministers and officers should monitor the progress. Earlier, Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu and Union Home Minister Amit Shah attended a program on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of Swarna Bharat Trust in Vellore. Vice President recalled the historic day when the bill to abolish Article 370 was brought and passed in Rajya Sabha. He also hailed the efforts of the central government in bringing this law.
I am very happy to be presiding over Rajya Sabha, particularly when Article 370 abolition was taken up in Rajya Sabha. It was a moment in my life. It was my life ambition and mission from the beginning. Kashmir is an integral part of India. Each inch of Kashmir belongs to India and they are equal citizens. That is a conviction.
Well, Home Minister said that Vice President and Rajya Sabha Chairman M. Venkaiah Naidu is setting an example. He also called him an ideal custodian of the Constitution and said that the Vice President has accomplished his role with utmost sincerity and discipline.
राज्य सभा के चेयरमैन के नाते वेंकैया जी और उपराष्ट्रपति के नाते वेंकैया जी एक आदर्श कस्टोडियन ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कैसा हो सकता है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में जो उपराष्ट्रपति महोदय के लिए भूमिका बताई गई है, इसका आदर्श निर्वहन कैसे हो सकता है, इसका एग्जाम्पल वेंकैया जी सेट कर रहे हैं। पूरा जीवन परिवारवाद के खिलाफ उन्होंने ढेर सारी शिरकतें कर भारत के लोकतंत्र को स्वस्थ रखने का प्रयास किया।
Security forces enlisted major success in the fight against Naxalism on Saturday when 26 Naxals were neutralized in a police encounter in Gadchiroli district of Maharashtra. A top Naxal commander, Milind Teltumble, was among those killed. Teltumble carried a cash reward of 50 lakh rupees. Maharashtra's Home Minister hailed the action as a remarkable achievement not only in the history of the state but also in the history of the country.
In a major success for security forces, 26 Naxalites were killed in an encounter with C-60 unit of the Maharashtra Police Force inside the dense Gayarpatti Kotgul forest area of Gadchiroli district on Saturday. According to police, Milind Tel Tumbre, the mastermind in several Naxal activities in Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, was killed in anti-Naxal operations on Saturday. Tel Tumbre had a bounty of 50 lakh rupees on his head. Congratulating the police force, State Home Minister Dilip Walse Patil said that today's action is a remarkable achievement not only in the history of the state but also in the history of the country.
कल जो गढ़चिरौली में नक्सलियों के साथ जो एक एनकाउंटर हुआ उसमें कम से कम 26 नक्सलाइट्स मारे गए हुए हैं। उसमें 20 पुरुष हैं, 6 महिलाएं हैं और ये गढ़चिरौली पुलिस ने कंफर्म किया है अभी इसमें मिलिंद तेल तुंबड़े भी है।
In the search operation, the police seized a large quantity of Naxal material during the raid, including 5 AK-47 rifles, 9 SLR rifles, 9 Barabor rifles and 29 different weapons.
इंटरमिटेंटली रुक कर ये फायर सुबह 6 बजे से लेकर करीब 3:30-4 बजे तक, मतलब 9:30-10 घंटे तक इंटरमिटेंटली ये फायर चलता रहा। इस फायरिंग में उन्होंने सोफिस्टिकेटेड ऑटोमेटिक वेपन्स AK-47, SLR, UBGL, त्यांचे कंट्री मेड होम मेड BGL, इस तरह के वेपन्स का इस्तेमाल किया और काफ़ी हेवी एम्यूनिशन का भी इस्तेमाल उन्होंने किया। हमारी पार्टियों ने वहाँ डटकर उसका मुकाबला किया।
4 policemen were also injured in the encounter and have been shifted to Nagpur for treatment. With input from Shama Mishra, Bureau Report, DD India.
A delegation from Punjab, Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir met Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Sunday requesting for reopening of Kartarpur corridor closed on account of the COVID-19 pandemic before Sri Guru Nanak Dev's birth anniversary on 19th November. Here's more on what happened at the meeting.
A delegation from Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir and Delhi met Prime Minister Narendra Modi and requested him to reopen Kartarpur corridor. They also submitted a memorandum to him. The delegation members thanked the Prime Minister Narendra Modi for paying special attention to address the issues related to the Sikh community. The delegation members recalled how earlier this year in May, the Prime Minister had visited Gurudwara Seesganj Sahib to offer prayers on the occasion of the 400th Prakash Purab of Guru Tegh Bahadur.
वहाँ हमने उनको जो मांग पत्र दिया है उसमें जो हमारा करतारपुर कॉरिडोर का लांघा है उसको खोलने के लिए हमने उनको बेनती की है। तो हमें पूरी उम्मीद है कि हमारे देश के प्रधानमंत्री जिन्होंने हमारे सिख भाईचारे के लिए इतने काम किए हैं कि जो 70 साल में जो कांग्रेस है वो काम नहीं कर पाई, बहुत जल्दी ही ये हमारी मांग मानकर हमारे जो सिख भाईचारे हैं उनकी मांग मानकर वो दर्शनों को खुलवा देंगे, हमें पूरी उम्मीद है।
The delegation members also recalled the steps taken to bring Swarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib to Delhi safely from Afghanistan. Earlier this year in August, the 3 holy Swarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji were received by the Union Cabinet Minister Hardeep Singh Puri.
ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਰੂਪ ਉਥੋਂ ਲਿਆਂਦੇ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੇ ਮਾਣ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਥਾਪਿਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਅਤੇ ਜੋ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ।
The delegation members requested the Prime Minister that Kartarpur corridor should be reopened before 19th of this month. They said that it will be a big gift for the followers of Guru Nanak Dev Ji.
Guru Nanak Dev Ji ਦੇ ਨਾਮ ਲੇਵਾ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਸਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸਿਰਫ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਔਰ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਆਸਥਾ 'ਤੇ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਆ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਮੌਕਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਕੋਰੀਡੋਰ ਖੋਲ੍ਹਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ ਔਰ 19 ਤਾਰੀਖ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਅਗਰ ਖੋਲ੍ਹ ਦੇਣ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਮੰਤਰੀ ਜੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਮੌਕਾ ਮਿਲੇਗਾ। ਇਸ ਆਸਥਾ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਆ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਮੋਦੀ ਜੀ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛਾ ਲੱਗਾ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਭਾਵਨਾ ਹੈ।
Kartarpur corridor has been closed since March 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the country. The corridor had been operational for only a short duration after it was formally opened in November 2019. After nearly 20 months, the Government of India has decided to reopen the Kartarpur Sahib corridor, allowing one group of pilgrims to undertake the yatra this November. The Minister of External Affairs informed on 11th of November that access to the Kartarpur corridor, which has been suspended since March 2020, will be reopened between November 16 to 26 this year. Bureau Report, DD India.
The centre is all set to celebrate the birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas on 15th November. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will launch multiple key initiatives for the welfare of the tribal community on the occasion. He will inaugurate the Bhagwan Birsa Munda Memorial Park and Museum at Ranchi via video conferencing.
Continuing to highlight the contributions of the great freedom fighters under the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the Modi government has declared 15th of November the birth anniversary of Amar Shahid Bhagwan Birsa Munda as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas to pay tribute to the tribal freedom fighters. The Prime Minister has always emphasized the invaluable contribution of tribal communities, particularly their sacrifices in the cause of the Indian freedom struggle. During his address at a program on Sunday, the Prime Minister elaborated on how Janjatiya Gaurav Divas will be celebrated every year on November 15.
पूर्वोत्तर के आदिवासी सेनानियों ने और देश के भी हमारे आदिवासी सेनानियों ने देश के लिए अपना बलिदान दिया है। इस परंपरा को सम्मान देने के लिए, इस विरासत को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए देश लगातार काम कर रहा है। इसी कड़ी में आजादी के अमृत महोत्सव के दौरान देश ने एक बहुत बड़ा फैसला लिया है। देश अब 15 नवंबर को हर साल भगवान बिरसा मुंडा की जन्म जयंती को जनजातीय गौरव दिवस के रूप में मनाया जाएगा।
Prime Minister Modi will visit Madhya Pradesh on Monday to participate in Janjatiya Gaurav Divas Mahasammelan in Bhopal, where he will launch multiple initiatives for the welfare of the Janjatiya community. The Mahasammelan is expected to be attended by more than 2 lakh tribals. He will also launch the Birsa Munda Freedom Fighters Museum in Ranchi via video conferencing and the Rashan Aapke Gram scheme in Madhya Pradesh aimed at delivering the monthly quota of PDS ration to beneficiaries from Janjatiya community in their own villages every month. Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan inspected preparations for this grand event.
प्रधानमंत्री जी ने फैसला किया है, हमारे जो जनजाति नायक हैं, योद्धा हैं, जिन्होंने आज़ादी की लड़ाई लड़ी, ये उनके प्रति श्रद्धा अर्पित करने का कार्यक्रम है।
Modi government's decision to celebrate Janjatiya Gaurav Divas is being considered as an important opportunity to learn about the great people from the tribal community from across the country.
देश भर के तमाम ऐसे जो जनजातीय समाज के नेतृत्व करने वाले लोग हैं, उनकी पहचान, उनका इतिहास, उनके बारे में रिसर्च और वैसे आयोजनों को हम प्राथमिकता के साथ मनाएंगे ताकि हमारा आत्म स्वाभिमान जो सदा से रहा है उसको हम और अधिक मुखर रूप से प्रस्तुत कर सकें।
Events like Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav as well as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas are aimed at refreshing true stories of the struggle for the country's independence and the unmatched sacrifices made therein. This event is an opportunity to pay tribute to the heroes who laid down their lives for the nation. Bureau Report, DD India.
During Prime Minister's visit to Madhya Pradesh on 15th November, he will inaugurate the redeveloped Rani Kamlapati Railway Station. The redeveloped station, named after the brave and fearless Queen Kamlapati of the Gond Kingdom, is the first world-class railway station in Madhya Pradesh. During the event, Prime Minister will also dedicate to the nation multiple initiatives of the railways in Madhya Pradesh, including gauge-converted and electrified Ujjain, Fatehabad, Chandravati Ganj, broad gauge section, third line in Bhopal, Bharkhera section, gauge-converted and electrified Mathela Nimar, Kheri, broad gauge section and electrified Guna Gwalior section. Prime Minister will also flag off 2 new memo trains between Ujjain and Indore and Indore and Ujjain. Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal inaugurated the 40th India International Trade Fair in New Delhi. The theme of this year's fair is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Addressing the event, Piyush Goyal listed 5 major sutras of Bharat, that is economy, exports, infrastructure, demand and diversity. He said that better infrastructure, demand for good development and diversity in growth will become the pivot of economic resurgence. He added that India can become the world's hub of industry and services, and Indian industry can soar to new heights on quality, competitiveness and economies of scale. Piyush Goyal said that IITF will help realize the goal of local goes global and make in India for the world.
So the last time we were able to hold this was in 2019. Last year, obviously, because of COVID, this was deferred. But I'm delighted that as soon as COVID protocols permitted the exhibitions to start, I think the notification came on 15th of September. And within 2 months of that, ITPO has very successfully, in an expanded way, 3 times what it was in 2019, started the International Trade Fair. My congratulations to all the colleagues in ITPO and in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, along with all the state governments and other ministries at the center in the states who have participated with so much enthusiasm to make this trade fair a grand success.
India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh addressed the Silver Jubilee celebrations of All India Ex-Servicemen Council in Lucknow, where he asserted that while earlier the world knew about the capabilities of United States and Israel in the fight against terrorism, now the world recognizes the mettle of India in the fight against any form of terrorism. Listen in.
लोग कहते थे कि आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई लड़ने का की ताकत कुव्वत यदि किसी के पास है तो अमेरिका के पास है तो इजराइल के पास है। लेकिन अब हालात बदल गए। अब दुनिया यह मानने लगी है कि नहीं, आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ने की कुव्वत भारत के पास भी है। सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक करके भी हम लोगों ने दिखा दिया और एयर स्ट्राइक करके भी हम लोगों ने दिखा दिया। कोई ये उम्मीद नहीं करता, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जगत के लोग भी ये उम्मीद नहीं करते थे इस तरीके से सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक होगी, उसकी धरती पर जाकर आतंकवादियों का सफाया करना, उनके कैंप्स का सफाया करना।
The virtual registrations for the 52nd International Film Festival of India are now open. The 52nd edition of IFFI will be held in Goa from 20th to 28th November. In view of the present COVID-19 situation, it will be held in a hybrid format. The International Film Festival of India was founded in 1952 and is one of the most significant film festivals in Asia. It aims at providing a common platform to the cinemas of the world to project the excellence of the film art. In international news, the Spanish Coast Guards have found the bodies of 8 African migrants in a boat which was drifting in the sea off Spain's Gran Canaria island on Sunday. That's what the Canary Islands government has said. 62 migrants, all of them men, except a 12-year-old boy, were rescued by Coast Guards. 3 people who were critically ill were flown by helicopter to a hospital in Gran Canaria. 9 others are treated by the Spanish Coast Guard as they were taken to the island. Also, the boat carrying the migrants had been drifting in the Atlantic about 40 miles to the south of Gran Canaria for about a week. Argentines headed out to vote on Sunday in midterm elections that will establish the power balance in Congress, with the ruling Peronist party battling to avoid damaging losses that could erase its majority in the Senate, held for almost 40 years. The vote sees half the seats in the lower chamber of deputies up for grabs and a third in the Senate, with voters focused on rampant inflation running above 50% and high poverty levels arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. Taliban forces held a military parade in Kabul on Sunday using American-made armored vehicles and Russian helicopters in an apparent bid to show off its growing military muscle. The parade was linked to the graduation of freshly trained soldiers. The exercise involved dozens of US-made M117 armored security vehicles driving slowly up and down a major Kabul road, with Mi-17 helicopters patrolling overhead. Many soldiers carried American-made M4 assault rifles. Most of the weapons and equipment the Taliban forces are now using are those supplied by Washington to the American-backed government in Kabul in a bid to construct an Afghan national force capable of fighting the Taliban. Japan's ex-princess Mako, the emperor's niece, departed the country with her new husband on Sunday to start a new life in the United States. Known as Mako Kumuro, after giving up her royal title to marry college sweetheart Kei Kumuro. Last month, the former royal and her husband, both 30 years old, walked past waiting journalists at Tokyo's Haneda International Airport before boarding an ANA flight for New York. After the wedding, Mako, daughter of Crown Princess Akishino and Crown Princess Kiko, received her first passport so she could accompany Kei to New York, where he works at a law firm. The marriage captivated Japan and ignited a public dialogue about gender roles and media coverage of the royal family. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of Newsnight. Thanks for watching.